They say the mind can play tricks on you. But what if the ones around you insist you're losing yours when you know you're clinging to the last threads of sanity? The day my husband walked out of the doctor's office, whispering that I was losing my mind, I felt every fiber of my being fracture. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. For 51 years, I've lived in the same cramped Brooklyn apartment on Ocean Avenue, where the wallpaper has faded from yellow roses to ghostly cream, and the scent of brewing coffee never quite warms the chill that has settled into my bones. I wake every morning at 5:30, not because I want to, but because my body has memorized the rhythm of serving others before myself. The routine was always the same. Fold Robert's shirts with precision, iron the creases he'd inspect with critical eyes, prepare his breakfast exactly how he liked it, 2 eggs over easy, toast barely golden, coffee black as his moods had become. My hands shake now, arthritis making simple tasks feel like climbing mountains, but I never complained. Complaining was weakness, Robert always said. Outside my kitchen window, Brooklyn bustled with life. Yellow taxis honked their way down Flatbush Avenue. Neighbors chatted on stoops, children laughed on their way to school. But inside these 4 walls, I felt like a ghost carrying decades of memories that seemed to matter to no one but me. Last Tuesday changed everything. I had begged Robert to come with me to Dr. Peterson's office on Kings Highway. My memory had been slipping. Small things, like forgetting where I put my reading glasses or standing in the grocery store unable to remember what I came to buy. The confusion scared me. I needed someone to hold my hand, to tell me I wasn't losing myself completely. Robert sat in the waiting room, scrolling through his phone with the same irritation he showed when I asked him to help with anything. When Dr. Peterson called us in, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe together we could figure out what was happening to me. But as I described my symptoms, the forgetfulness, the moments of confusion, the overwhelming fatigue, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Robert wasn't looking at me with concern or compassion. His eyes held something else entirely, something calculating. When Dr. Peterson stepped out to get some forms, Robert leaned forward and whispered to the nurse, just loud enough for me to hear, "She's losing it. Really losing it. I don't know how much longer I can handle this." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my husband, this man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, and saw a stranger. The same eyes that once sparkled when he proposed to me at Coney Island now held cold calculation. He wanted others to believe I was broken. That night, I sat in our living room holding our old photo album, page after page of memories, our wedding day at St. Mary's, vacations to the Catskills, Christmas mornings with our children, Sarah and Michael, when they were small and still thought I hung the moon. In every picture, I was smiling, giving, loving without reservation. When had that love turned into burden? When had I become something to manage instead of someone to cherish? You see, I had given everything to this family. Everything. In the early years, when money was tight and Robert was struggling to establish his construction business, I worked double shifts at Goldstein's Deli on Avenue J. My feet would swell until I could barely walk, but I never complained. The money I earned went straight into our joint account, money that eventually helped Robert invest in stocks that would make him a small fortune over the years. When Sarah was born, I quit my job to care for her full-time. Then came Michael 2 years later. I was up all night with fevers, colic, nightmares. I packed lunches, helped with homework, drove to soccer practice and piano lessons and dance recitals. I made Halloween costumes by hand, baked birthday cakes from scratch, created magic from nothing because we couldn't afford much else. "Mom, you always do so much for us," Sarah used to say, wrapping her little arms around my waist. Those hugs were everything to me then. But somewhere along the way, quick hugs replaced long conversations. Thank you became habit rather than feeling. As the years passed, Robert's construction business grew. The stock market investments I had helped fund began paying off handsomely. We weren't wealthy exactly, but we were comfortable. More than comfortable. Robert had accumulated assets worth several $100,000, including some cryptocurrency he'd bought early that had grown substantially in value. But with financial success came expectations. When Sarah graduated from college and needed money for her wedding, I emptied my small savings account without question. When Michael lost his job during the recession, we supported his family for 8 months. When Robert's mother needed expensive nursing care, I took on a part-time job at the library to help cover costs. Mom, can you help us with the down payment? Mom, can you lend me money for car repairs? Mom, can you watch the kids for the weekend? I said yes to everything. Always yes. Because that's what mothers do. What wives do. We give until there's nothing left, and then we find more to give. But something shifted in recent years. The requests became demands. The gratitude became expectation. And Robert's attitude toward me became something I barely recognized. "You're imagining things again," he'd say when I mentioned feeling tired or overwhelmed. "You're being dramatic," when I asked for help with household tasks that were becoming difficult with my arthritis. "You worry too much," when I expressed concern about our finances or our family relationships. Slowly, I began to doubt myself. Was I being dramatic? Was I imagining the coldness in their voices? The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms? The feeling that I was becoming invisible in my own home? The doctor visits became another battleground. Each time I mentioned a symptom, the joint pain that kept me awake, the memory lapses that frightened me, the depression that settled over me like fog, Robert would interrupt. "She's always been anxious," he'd tell doctors. "Tends to exaggerate symptoms. I think it's attention-seeking behavior." Attention-seeking behavior. As if 51 years of putting everyone else first was somehow selfish. As if asking for basic care and compassion was too much. The breaking point came last month. My 73rd birthday arrived on a rainy Thursday in October. I had mentioned the date several times, even circled it on the kitchen calendar in red ink. But the day passed without acknowledgement. No calls from Sarah or Michael. No card from Robert. Nothing. I sat at the kitchen table that evening, surrounded by the silence of a home that no longer felt like home. I lit a single birthday candle on a piece of toast and made a wish. I wished to matter to someone. Anyone. 2 days later, Robert announced he was going to visit his brother in Queens for the weekend. Something in his tone made me suspicious. We hadn't seen his brother in over a year, and suddenly it was urgent? "Why now?" I asked. "You wouldn't understand," he replied, grabbing his jacket. "It's business." That night, alone in our apartment, I did something I never thought I'd do. I slipped a small voice recorder into the pocket of Robert's jacket. It was a tiny device I'd bought months earlier when I was considering recording doctor appointments to help remember instructions. I told myself I needed proof. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Proof that something was terribly wrong with how I was being treated. The weekend dragged by. I cleaned the apartment, tended to my small herb garden on the fire escape, and tried to quiet the voice in my head that whispered I was being paranoid. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe I was imagining things. He returned Sunday evening in a mood I couldn't read. Distant but almost excited? He went straight to his study and closed the door, making phone calls in hushed tones that carried through the thin walls, but not the words. Monday morning, after he left for work, I retrieved the recorder from his jacket pocket with trembling hands. My heart pounded as I pressed play, not sure I was ready for what I might hear. What I heard destroyed something inside me that had already been cracking for years. Robert's voice, clear and calculating. "She's too much work now, Tommy." The doctor visits, the complaints, the way she follows me around like a lost puppy. And the money. Christ, the money we're spending on her medications and treatments. His brother's voice. What are you thinking? I've been looking into options. There's a place in New Jersey, not too expensive. Nothing fancy, but clean, safe. She'd be taken care of, and I'd be free to, live my life. What about the house, the savings? That's the beauty of it. If she's declared incompetent, I get full control of everything. The checking account, the investment portfolio, even the Bitcoin holdings. She doesn't even know about half of what we're worth. I've been smart about keeping her out of the financial picture. And the kids? Robert laughed, a sound that made my blood freeze. Sarah's already on board. She thinks her mother needs professional care. Michael's harder to convince, but he'll come around when he realizes there might be an inheritance worth fighting for. The recording went on for 43 minutes. 43 minutes of my husband and his brother discussing my life like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. They talked about forging documents, finding doctors who would declare me incompetent, even staging incidents to make me appear unstable. I sat on my kitchen floor, holding that small recorder, and felt something break inside me that had been holding me together for decades. The betrayal tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the device. For 51 years, I had loved this man completely. I had given him my youth, my dreams, my identity. I had supported his business with my wages, raised his children while he built his fortune, cared for his mother when she was dying. I had been loyal, faithful, devoted, and he saw me as nothing more than an expensive burden. I crawled to the living room and looked at our wedding picture on the mantel. That young woman in white, so full of hope and love, trusting completely that the man beside her would protect and cherish her forever. What would I tell her if I could travel back in time? That evening, I dropped my favorite coffee mug, the one Sarah had given me for Mother's Day years ago, painted with tiny flowers. It shattered against the kitchen tiles, and I stared at the pieces scattered across the floor, like my marriage, like my family, like my trust. But in that moment of destruction, something else happened, something unexpected. I whispered, "No more." The words came from somewhere deep inside me, a place that had been buried under decades of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. No more. For the first time in years, I didn't clean up the broken pieces immediately. I left them there and went to bed, where I slept more soundly than I had in months. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger, a woman with gray hair and lines around her eyes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like strength. I had a choice to make. I could continue pretending everything was fine, continue being the convenient victim of my family's manipulation, or I could do something I had never done in my adult life. I could fight back. But fighting back meant risking everything. It meant potentially losing the only family I had, even if that family was treating me terribly. At 73, who would I be without them? The fear was paralyzing. Loneliness seemed worse than disrespect. At least with Robert and the children, I had some sense of purpose, even if that purpose was being used. I spent 3 days pacing our small apartment, playing the recording over and over, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood something. Maybe Robert was just frustrated. Maybe he didn't really mean it. But deep down, I knew better. The coldness in his voice, the casual way he discussed discarding me. This wasn't momentary frustration. This was a man who had stopped seeing me as human years ago. On Thursday, I did something that surprised even me. I bought a small notebook and began writing down every incident I could remember of being dismissed, belittled, or ignored. The list grew longer than I expected. Robert interrupting me at dinner parties. Sarah rolling her eyes when I offered advice. Michael changing the subject whenever I tried to talk about my health concerns. The casual cruelties that had become so normal I had stopped noticing them. But I also wrote down other things. Moments that contradicted their narrative of me as incompetent or unstable. I still balanced our checkbook to the penny. I still remembered every grandchild's birthday, every family anniversary, every important date. I still cooked elaborate holiday meals, managed our household, and handled all the emotional labor of maintaining family relationships. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my will to continue being their convenient target. That Sunday, Michael called to ask if I could babysit his twins while he and his wife went to a wedding. The request was typical, last minute, assumed rather than asked, with no consideration for whether I might have other plans. For the first time in my adult life, I said no. "What do you mean, no?" Michael's voice carried the shock of someone who had never heard that word from me. "I mean, I have other plans." "What plans? You never have plans." The casual dismissal of my entire existence stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. "I have plans now." I hung up before he could guilt me into changing my mind. My hands were shaking, but I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of setting a boundary. Within an hour, Sarah called. Then Robert. Both confused, slightly angry, demanding to know what was wrong with me. "Nothing's wrong with me," I said to each of them. "That's exactly the point." That night, I pulled out all our old photo albums and spread them across the living room floor. 51 years of memories, graduations, holidays, vacations, celebrations. In every single picture I was there, organizing, serving, celebrating others' achievements, making everyone else's life smoother and happier. But looking at those photos now, I saw something else. I saw a woman disappearing by degrees. In the early pictures, I had opinions, preferences, dreams. As the years progressed, I became background, a supporting character in everyone else's story. I took one photo, Robert and me at Coney Island during our courtship, young and laughing, and packed the rest away. That young woman deserved better than what her future held. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for the woman I had become. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Maria Santos, my upstairs neighbor. Maria was 68, a widow who had raised 4 children and buried a husband she loved deeply. She was also the only person in my life who seemed to see me as a complete human being. "Margaret, you sound different," she said when I asked if we could talk. "Stronger somehow." I told her everything, the recording, the years of manipulation, the plan to have me declared incompetent. Maria listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Misha, you know what you have to do," she said finally. "The question is whether you're brave enough to do it." The second call was harder. I looked up elder law attorneys in Brooklyn and found one who offered free consultations. Janet Hoffman had been practicing for 20 years and specialized in protecting seniors from financial abuse. "What you're describing is unfortunately common," she told me during our phone call. "Family members often target elderly relatives' assets, especially when there's a significant amount of money involved. Your husband's cryptocurrency and investment portfolio alone makes you a prime target. But what can I do? I'm just a housewife." "You're a woman whose rights have been violated. You have options, Mrs. Morrison. More options than you realize." I made an appointment for the following week. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. The weekend brought another test. Robert announced that Sarah and her family were coming for Sunday dinner, and that Michael and his wife would join us. "Make that roast they like," he said, not asking, assuming I would comply as I always had, and that chocolate cake Sarah's always asking for. I stood at the kitchen counter, looking at the grocery list I had automatically started writing, and stopped. "No." "What?" I said no. "If they want dinner, they can help cook it. Or we can order takeout. Robert's face went through several expressions: confusion, annoyance, and finally anger. What's gotten into you lately? You're acting strange. Strange. Code for not compliant, not invisible, not conveniently silent. I'm acting like someone who deserves basic respect. Respect? I've been supporting you for 50 years. And I've been supporting you right back. Cooking, cleaning, raising your children, taking care of your mother, working when we needed money, giving up every dream I ever had to make your life easier. When exactly do I get to stop earning the right to be treated like a human being? Robert stared at me like I had grown a second head. Maybe I had. Maybe the old Margaret, the one who absorbed disrespect like a sponge, was finally gone. Sunday dinner was tense. I made sandwiches instead of roast, served store-bought cookies instead of homemade cake. Sarah complained about the strange meal. Michael asked if I was feeling all right. Robert glared at me from across the table, but I sat straighter than I had in years. I met their eyes instead of looking down at my plate. I participated in conversations instead of just serving and clearing. "Mom, you seem different," Sarah said as she was leaving. It wasn't a compliment. "I'm exactly the same," I replied. "I'm just not pretending anymore that being treated poorly is normal." That week, I had my first meeting with Janet Hoffman. Her office was in a converted brownstone near Prospect Park, and she offered me coffee in a real mug, not a paper cup, a small kindness that almost made me cry. "Tell me about your financial situation," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I realized I didn't know as much as I should. Robert handled business, had always handled it, claiming it was too complicated for me to understand. But I knew about the checking account we shared, the savings account with both our names, the house we owned outright. What I didn't know was that Robert had opened several accounts in his name only, including investment accounts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that had grown from the foundation I had helped build with my wages from the deli, my unpaid labor as mother and homemaker, my sacrifices of personal dreams and ambitions. In New York, assets acquired during marriage are considered marital property regardless of whose name is on the account, Janet explained. You have rights to those investments, that cryptocurrency, all of it. But we need to act quickly if your husband is planning to have you declared incompetent. She gave me homework, gathering financial documents, recording any conversations where Robert discussed his plans, documenting instances of emotional abuse or manipulation. Most importantly, she said as I was leaving, you need to understand that you're not powerless. You've been trained to believe you are, but that's not reality. I walked home from that appointment through Prospect Park, watching families play on playgrounds, couples walking dogs, elderly people feeding ducks at the pond. Normal life continuing all around me while my world was being rebuilt from the ground up. That evening, Robert came home in a particularly good mood. He'd had lunch with his brother and seemed pleased about something. "I've been thinking," he said over dinner. "Maybe we should consider moving somewhere smaller, easier to maintain, less expensive." I knew this was the beginning, the first step in his plan to isolate me, control me, eventually discard me. "Where did you have in mind?" "There's a nice place in New Jersey, senior living, very reasonable rates." Senior living, code for the facility they had discussed on the recording. "I like it here," I said calmly. "I like our neighborhood, our friends." "What friends?" Robert's tone was dismissive. "You barely leave this apartment except for doctor's appointments." The cruelty was casual, automatic, a reminder that in his mind, I had already ceased to be a full person. "I have friends," I said quietly. "More than you might think." 3 weeks later, I was ready for the confrontation I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Janet had helped me understand my legal rights, Maria had provided emotional support, and I had finally found my voice. I asked Robert to call the children and arrange a family meeting. He seemed pleased, probably thinking I was ready to discuss options for my future care. "We need to have a serious conversation," I told Sarah when she arrived with her husband and 2 teenagers. Michael came alone. His wife suddenly had other plans when she learned the meeting was serious. They gathered in our living room, the same room where I had entertained them for decades, where Christmas mornings had unfolded, where we had celebrated every milestone and weathered every crisis. I had prepared for weeks, but my hands still shook as I stood before them. "I know what you've been planning," I began. Robert's face flushed. "What are you talking about?" Instead of explaining, I pulled out a small speaker and pressed play. Their voices filled the room, Robert and his brother discussing my future like I was livestock to be sold. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's teenagers stared at their grandfather with something approaching horror. Michael's face went pale. "Dad, what the hell?" Sarah's voice cracked. You can't do this to Mom." She needs care," Robert said defensively. "Professional care. She's been acting erratic, forgetful." "I've been acting like someone who refuses to be invisible anymore," I interrupted. "There's a difference." I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up our wedding photo. The young couple smiling back seemed like strangers now. "For 51 years I believed in this," I said, holding up the picture. "I believed in us, in this family. I gave everything I had to all of you, and I never asked for anything in return except basic human decency." Slowly, deliberately, I tore the photo in half. "Mom," Sarah gasped. "I am not your problem to be managed," I continued. "I am not your burden to be discarded. I am not your convenient target for manipulation and control." I walked to the kitchen and returned with a lockbox I had purchased the week before. Inside were the bank cards Robert had always controlled, the checkbook he managed, the important documents he kept safe from me. "Dad, is this true?" Michael's voice was strained. "Were you really going to have Mom declared incompetent?" Robert's silence was answer enough. "I want you to understand something," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I will no longer buy love with my compliance. I will no longer accept disrespect in exchange for the privilege of being tolerated. I will no longer pretend that your convenience is more important than my dignity." Sarah was crying now. "Mom, we didn't know." "You knew enough. You knew I was unhappy. You knew I was being dismissed and ignored. You knew, and you chose to look the other way because it was easier than standing up for me." I locked the box and placed it on the coffee table between us. "From now on, things change. I will not be cooking elaborate meals for people who can't be bothered to say thank you. I will not be lending money to children who treat me like an ATM. I will not be sacrificing my health and happiness for people who see me as expendable." Robert stood up, his face red with anger. "You can't do this. You don't understand the finances, the legal implications." "I understand more than you think. I've learned quite a lot about marital property laws, about elder abuse, about my rights as a human being and a citizen of this state." "You're being manipulated by someone," he said desperately. "This isn't you talking. This is exactly me talking. For the first time in decades, this is me talking." The room erupted in arguments, tears, accusations. Robert tried the old tactics: gaslighting, emotional manipulation, threats. Sarah wavered between guilt and defensiveness. Michael seemed genuinely shocked by the extent of his father's betrayal. But I remained calm, centered in a way I hadn't felt since I was young. The chaos around me couldn't touch the quiet strength I had finally found. "Here's what's going to happen," I said when the shouting died down. "Anyone who wants to be part of my life going forward will treat me with the respect you would show any other adult human being. Anyone who can't manage that level of basic decency will not be welcome in my home or my life." "Mom, you're being unreasonable," Sarah said through tears. "I'm being reasonable for the first time in my adult life." "That feels unreasonable to you because you've never had to consider my feelings before." They left that evening in various states of anger, confusion, and what I hoped might be the beginning of remorse. Robert slept in the guest room, and we didn't speak for 3 days. I thought the worst was over. I thought I had won some kind of victory. But I had underestimated the depth of Robert's desperation and the cruelty he was capable of when cornered. 2 months later, just as I was beginning to feel proud of my new boundaries, just as I was starting to enjoy the peace of a home without constant tension, Robert played a card I hadn't expected. He started telling people I was having a mental breakdown. I first learned about it from Mrs. Chen, who lived across the hall. She knocked on my door one morning with a concerned expression and a covered dish. "Margaret, dear, Robert told me you've been having a difficult time. He said you've been saying strange things, acting paranoid. I brought you some soup." My blood went cold. "What exactly did he tell you?" "He said you've been accusing him of trying to steal from you, that you've become suspicious and volatile. He seemed so worried about you." I thanked Mrs. Chen for the soup and closed the door, my hands shaking with rage. This was it, the final phase of his plan. If he couldn't have me declared legally incompetent, he would destroy my reputation so thoroughly that no one would believe my side of the story. Over the next week, I discovered the full extent of his campaign. He had called our insurance company, suggesting I needed psychiatric evaluation. He had spoken to Dr. Peterson, expressing concerns about my mental state. He had reached out to Sarah's friends, Michael's colleagues, even the mailman, painting himself as the long-suffering husband of an increasingly unstable woman. The isolation was swift and devastating. Phone calls stopped coming. Invitations dried up. Even Maria seemed more distant, unsure what to believe. I sat in my kitchen one evening, surrounded by the evidence of a life that was being systematically destroyed, and felt the walls closing in. This was how it would end. Not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet character assassination, death by 1,000 whispers. But then I remembered something Janet had told me during one of our sessions. The truth has weight. Lies might spread faster, but truth has staying power. Instead of falling apart, I did something Robert hadn't expected. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every lie, every attempt at manipulation. I recorded it all. I kept a detailed journal. I saved text messages and emails. I gathered evidence like a detective building a case. And then I did something that terrified me more than any of the previous confrontations. I reached out to people directly. I called Mrs. Chen back and played her the recording of Robert discussing his plans. I met with Dr. Peterson and presented a timeline of Robert's manipulation campaign. I contacted Sarah and Michael and laid out, methodically and calmly, exactly how their father was attempting to destroy my credibility. The response wasn't immediate, but it was profound. People began to see the pattern. The concerned husband narrative fell apart when confronted with evidence of his calculated cruelty. Sarah called me 3 weeks later, crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to believe it, but when you showed me those recordings, when I really thought about how Dad talks about you. God, Mom, what have we done to you?" Michael was slower to come around, but eventually he too began to see the manipulation he had been subjected to. Not just my manipulation, his own. Robert had been playing him against me for years, using family dynamics to maintain control. The final confrontation came 6 months after I had first discovered Robert's plan. He arrived home one evening to find his suitcases packed in the hallway. "What's this?" he demanded. "This is you leaving. Tonight. You can't throw me out of my own house. Our house. That we bought with money I helped earn. That I helped maintain for 51 years. And according to my attorney, I absolutely can ask you to leave." His face went through the familiar progression: surprise, anger, manipulation tactics. "Margaret, be reasonable. We can work this out. Marriage counseling, maybe. I know I've made mistakes. You plotted to have me declared incompetent so you could steal assets I helped build and abandon me in a nursing home. That's not a mistake, Robert. That's calculated cruelty. Where will I go? For just a moment, a flicker of the old Margaret felt sorry for him. 51 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight, even when that marriage became toxic. But then I remembered his voice on that recording, casually discussing my disposal like I was broken furniture. I remembered the months of gaslighting, the character assassination, the complete absence of remorse. That's no longer my problem to solve. He left that night, and for the first time in decades, I slept alone in my own bed without feeling lonely. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. The divorce took 8 months. Janet was brilliant, methodical, and fierce in protecting my rights. We recovered access to investment accounts I hadn't even known existed. Robert's cryptocurrency holdings, which had grown substantially over the years, were divided according to New York's equitable distribution laws. But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was waking up each morning in a home where I wasn't walking on eggshells, where I wasn't bracing for criticism, where I could make decisions about my own life. I started small. I painted the kitchen yellow, a color Robert had always hated. I bought plants and filled the apartment with green life. I threw away clothes that I had kept only because they were practical, and bought a few things simply because I liked them. I joined a watercolor class at the Brooklyn Museum. My hands, so long devoted to serving others, learned to create beauty for its own sake. The arthritis still slowed me down, but painting gave me a different kind of purpose. The instructor, Diana, was a woman in her 60s who had returned to art after raising 5 children. "It's never too late to remember who you were before the world told you who you should be," she told our class one afternoon. I reconnected with Ruth, my roommate from nursing school nearly 50 years ago. We had lost touch when life got complicated, when marriage and children consumed everything. But when I reached out, it was as if no time had passed. "I always wondered what happened to you," she said over coffee at a cafe in Park Slope. "You were so passionate about everything: books, politics, that boyfriend who played guitar. When did you stop being passionate?" It was a good question. When had I stopped having opinions, preferences, dreams that belonged to me alone? The relationship with my children was complicated. Sarah struggled with guilt and slowly began to treat me more like a person and less like a convenient grandmother. Michael remained distant, caught between loyalty to his father and recognition of how badly I had been treated. But my grandson, Sarah's youngest, started visiting me on his own. He was 16, old enough to understand family complexity, and curious about the grandmother he was finally getting to know as a real person. "Grandma, Dad always said you were just, I don't know, boring. Like you never did anything interesting," he told me one afternoon as I taught him to paint. "But you went to nursing school in the 60s? You worked? You had all these dreams?" "I did have dreams," I admitted. "I forgot about them for a while. But they're still there." Maria and I grew closer. She had watched my transformation from her apartment upstairs, cheering me on through every difficult decision. "You inspire me, mija," she told me one evening as we shared dinner on my newly decorated terrace garden. "I've been afraid to date again since my husband died, but watching you refuse to settle for being treated badly. Maybe it's time I demanded better for myself too." A year after Robert moved out, I did something I hadn't done since my honeymoon in 1972. I traveled alone. It was just a long weekend in Boston, staying in a small hotel near the Common, visiting museums and walking through neighborhoods I had never seen. But it felt revolutionary. Every decision was mine. Where to eat, what to see, when to rest. On the train home, I stared out the window at the landscape rushing past and realized something profound. I wasn't who I used to be before the marriage. That young woman was gone, shaped by decades of experiences both beautiful and painful. But I wasn't who I had been during the worst years either, diminished and invisible. I was someone entirely new. Someone who had survived betrayal and fought back. Someone who had rediscovered her own worth after decades of being told she had none. The apartment felt different when I returned. Brighter, more alive. The walls held my paintings now. Imperfect but honest attempts at capturing light and color. The kitchen smelled of herbs I grew myself. The bookshelves held novels I chose, not just cookbooks and household management guides. Robert called occasionally, usually when he needed something. Information about insurance, help finding documents, updates about the children. I was polite but distant. The anger had faded into something closer to pity. He had thrown away 51 years of partnership for the promise of controlling assets he couldn't have built without me. He had destroyed trust that could never be rebuilt, burned bridges he would never be able to cross again. At 74, he was starting over with nothing but money and the reputation of a man who had betrayed his wife of 5 decades. I was starting over with self-respect, genuine relationships, and the hard-won knowledge that I deserved better. Sarah visited for my 74th birthday, the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged the date in years. She brought flowers and a card with a longer message than she had written in decades. Mom, I know I can never undo the years of taking you for granted. I know I participated in Dad's campaign to make you feel invisible. I'm ashamed of the woman I became when I forgot that you were a complete person with feelings and needs. I'm trying to be better. We're all trying to be better. We cried together that afternoon, mourning the years lost to dysfunction and celebrating the possibility of rebuilding something healthier. Michael remained more distant, but he sent a text on my birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you're finding peace. It wasn't much, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that I existed as more than a convenient target for his frustrations. But the most meaningful moment came 2 months later. I was in the grocery store on Avenue J, the same store where I had shopped for the family for decades, when I ran into Mrs. Patterson, a woman from our old church. Margaret, oh my goodness, you look wonderful. There's something different about you. You're glowing. I thought about her comment as I walked home, bags of groceries I had chosen for myself, for meals I would cook because I enjoyed cooking, not because someone expected me to serve them. Maybe I was glowing. Maybe this is what happens when you stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. 6 months ago, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable during my marriage. I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter in Red Hook, helping other women recognize the patterns I had lived with for so long. The work was difficult, heartbreaking, but also deeply meaningful. These women, many of them younger than my own daughters, were fighting battles I understood intimately. How do you know when it's time to leave? A woman named Crystal asked me during one of our support group sessions. She was 28 with 2 small children and a husband who controlled every aspect of her life. You know when staying hurts more than leaving, I told her. When you realize you've disappeared so completely that you're not sure who you are anymore. When you understand that accepting disrespect isn't love, it's self-abandonment. Crystal left her husband 3 weeks later. She sent me a photo of her new apartment. Tiny but clean, safe, hers. The children were smiling in the picture, and so was she. Working with these women reminded me that my story wasn't unique. Millions of women, at every age and stage of life, were fighting to reclaim their sense of self from relationships that had consumed them. The details were different, but the core struggle was the same. Learning to believe you deserve better. As I write this, it's been 18 months since I discovered Robert's plan to discard me. 18 months since I found that voice recorder and learned the truth about my marriage. The apartment is quiet now, but it's a different kind of quiet than before. This silence belongs to me. It's not the silence of being ignored or dismissed. It's the peace of a mind that no longer needs to brace for criticism or manipulation. I sit at my kitchen table in the mornings, drinking coffee from a mug that says "You Matter," a gift from Maria, watching the sun rise over Brooklyn. The herb garden on my fire escape is thriving, The watercolor paintings on my walls capture moments of beauty I might have missed when my attention was always focused on others' needs. My checking account balance reflects careful management of resources that are finally under my control. The investment portfolio that Robert tried to hide from me now generates income I use for travel, art supplies, and small luxuries I denied myself for decades. But the real wealth isn't financial. It's the knowledge that at 74 years old, I finally learned to fight for myself. It's the relationships I've built with people who see and value me as a complete human being. It's the dreams I'm pursuing that have nothing to do with anyone else's expectations or demands. Last month, I signed up for a creative writing class at Brooklyn College. The young instructor seemed surprised to have a student my age, but I told her something that made her smile. I have 74 years of stories to tell. I'm just getting started. The other students, mostly in their 20s and 30s, treat me with respect and genuine interest. They ask about my life experiences, my perspectives on their work, my advice about everything from relationships to career decisions. Being valued for my mind, my insights, my accumulated wisdom instead of just my usefulness as a servant. It's a gift I had forgotten I deserved. 2 weeks ago, Sarah called with news that surprised both of us. She and her husband were separating, not because of abuse or betrayal, but because they had grown apart, and both deserved relationships that made them happy rather than just comfortable. I keep thinking about what you did, Mom, how you refused to accept being treated badly just because it was familiar. I want to be that brave. I told her that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. Every step I took toward reclaiming my life terrified me. But terror was better than the slow death of accepting the unacceptable. Michael has been slower to rebuild our relationship, but he recently asked if I wanted to have dinner with him, just the two of us, something that hadn't happened in years. I need to understand what happened, he told me over pasta at a small restaurant in Park Slope. Not just with you and Dad, but with all of us. How did we become people who thought it was okay to treat you like that? It was a difficult conversation, but an honest one. We talked about family patterns, about how easy it is to stop seeing people as fully human when they're always available, always accommodating, always putting everyone else's needs first. I don't know if I can fix what I did, he said as we walked back to my apartment. You can't change the past, I agreed. But you can choose how to treat people going forward. That's what I'm learning too. Every day is a chance to be better than yesterday. Robert and I are divorced now. The papers were finalized 3 months ago in a courthouse in downtown Brooklyn, where we had once gone to get our marriage license 51 years earlier. He looked older, smaller somehow, when I saw him across the courtroom. The confident man who had controlled every aspect of our household for decades seemed diminished by the consequences of his own choices. We didn't speak directly, but our lawyers negotiated the final details of our separation. I kept the apartment, he kept his construction business. We split the investment assets we had built together over 5 decades of marriage. But more importantly, I kept my dignity, my self-respect, my ability to sleep peacefully at night, knowing I had fought for myself when it mattered most. I heard through Sarah that Robert is dating someone, a woman in her 60s he met through his brother. Part of me feels sorry for her. She has no idea what she's getting involved with, how charming he can be at first, how gradually the control and manipulation begin. But that's not my problem to solve anymore. My job now is to live the life I almost let slip away. Yesterday, I received an unexpected visitor. Crystal, the young woman from the domestic violence shelter, came by with her children to show me their new apartment. Larger now, brighter, filled with furniture they had chosen themselves. I wanted to thank you, she said, as her kids played with toys I kept in a basket for my grandson's visits. Not just for the practical advice, but for showing me what it looks like to refuse to accept being treated badly. You saved my life. I made us tea, and we sat on my small terrace, watching her children giggle as they chased each other around the herb garden. The late afternoon light was golden, warm on our faces. "You saved your own life," I told her. "I just reminded you that it was worth saving." As I watched her children play, I thought about all the women who never get the chance to fight back, who die a little more each day until there's nothing left but the shell of who they used to be, who never learn that love shouldn't require you to disappear. I thought about my own mother, who spent 40 years married to a man who never acknowledged her dreams or opinions. She died at 71, still believing that self-sacrifice was the highest form of love. I wonder what she might have accomplished, who she might have become, if someone had told her she deserved better. But I also thought about the women who are fighting back right now, in apartments and houses across Brooklyn and beyond, who are learning, as I learned, that it's never too late to demand respect. That age doesn't disqualify you from dignity. That family relationships built on exploitation aren't worth preserving. This morning, I woke up naturally at 7:30. No alarm, no anxiety, no immediate mental list of other people's needs to meet. I made coffee in my yellow kitchen, tended to my herbs, and sat down to work on a painting I've been developing for weeks. It's a self-portrait, something I never would have attempted during my marriage. In it, I'm sitting in my chair by the window, morning light illuminating my face. My hair is completely gray now. I stopped coloring it months ago. And there are lines around my eyes that speak of both sorrow and joy. But my expression is peaceful, content. The woman in the painting knows who she is and likes what she sees. Later today, I'll attend my watercolor class, have lunch with Maria, and spend the evening reading a novel I chose simply because the cover intrigued me. Small pleasures that feel revolutionary after decades of serving everyone but myself. Tomorrow, I start training as a volunteer with the Elder Abuse Prevention Program at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. They need people who understand the patterns, who can recognize the signs, who can help other seniors realize they don't have to accept manipulation and control as the price of family connection. It's work that matters. Work that uses the hard-won wisdom of my own experience to help others avoid or escape similar situations. But tonight, I'll sit on my terrace with a glass of wine I bought because I like the label, watching the sunset paint the Brooklyn skyline in shades of orange and gold. I'll listen to the sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, couples arguing and laughing, the eternal rhythm of life continuing all around me. And I'll remember that this peace, this contentment, this sense of finally coming home to myself, it was worth every difficult decision, every moment of uncertainty, every risk I took to get here. To anyone listening to this story, anyone who recognizes pieces of their own life in my experience, I want you to understand something. You matter. Your feelings matter. Your dreams matter. Your comfort and happiness matter just as much as anyone else's. It doesn't matter if you're 74 or 47 or 31. It doesn't matter if you've been accepting disrespect for 5 years or 50. It doesn't matter if the people mistreating you are family members you love or partners you've committed your life to. You deserve better. And more importantly, you have the power to demand better. The road isn't easy. There will be moments when standing up for yourself feels impossible, when the fear of loneliness seems worse than the reality of disrespect, when everyone around you insists you're being unreasonable for expecting basic human decency. But I promise you this: the peace that comes from finally honoring your own worth is greater than any temporary discomfort of setting boundaries. The joy of waking up in a life that belongs to you is worth every relationship you lose by refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. You are not too old, too dependent, too invested in the current situation to change it. You are not required to buy love with your silence, your service, or your submission. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Your life is not a rough draft. This is it, the only one you get. And you deserve to spend it surrounded by people who celebrate you rather than diminish you, who lift you up rather than tear you down, who see your full humanity rather than just your usefulness to them. Have you ever lived through something like this? Have you watched someone you love disappear into a relationship that consumed them? Have you felt the weight of family expectations that required you to sacrifice your own well-being for everyone else's convenience? Share your story in the comments below. Let others know they're not alone in this struggle. And if this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you of your own worth or gave you courage to demand better treatment, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these truths that too often go unspoken. Remember, you matter. Your story matters. And it's never too late to start the next chapter on your own terms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me remind you that you deserve all the love and respect you've been giving to everyone else. The sun is setting now over Brooklyn, painting my little apartment in golden light. I'm exactly where I belong, in a life I fought for, surrounded by beauty I created, at peace with choices I made for myself. This is what freedom looks like. This is what self-respect feels like. This is what happens when you finally come home to yourself. And it's never, ever too late to begin.